Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with Andy Lipson and our favorite guests,
Yes.
Gema and Kenny.
Yes. Who's been here before?
Yes.
A year ago, apparently.
No. A year ago, we did our first episode.
Okay.
Shout outs.
Yeah, so this is
Congrats.
literally May
Yes,
15th.
so 1 year anniversary.
1 year anniversary. And y'all were here 2 months ago, maybe?
About maybe, yeah.
When we talked about when Guaido was
Guaido.
Oh, Guaido. April 30th. That's when it was when they first announced that. No, that was the April 30th is when he said, "Oh, the military was going to do it."
Right.
But the coup/revolution was back in February.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Okay, so that's when you guys came over for that. So we invited them to come again because there was Guaido made an announcement on April 30th that there's a military uprising against Maduro, and in light of what has happened, we thought we wanted to revisit this question of what was really going on in Venezuela. Was it a coup? Does it represent an actual sincere uprising of the people to some extent? But honestly, now events have gone beyond that.
That's what
Yeah. Now it's not just about Venezuela right now. We feel like we need to discuss China and Iran.
Thank you.
So this is our 1 year anniversary to discuss another year of the U.S. empire just stomping all over the globe. And so I think we're going to be talking about that today.
Yeah, thank you for stealing my light.
Sorry about that.
I'm kidding. I thought I was introducing.
But now if it's been a year, I'm taking the whole show over.
sounds about right. Sounds about right.
Your intentions are clear now.
Thank you.
So, yes. So thank you for that introduction.
I told you Eduardo was going to give the introduction.
Anyhow, with that said, so we will then pass the mic over to Gema.
So, look, I still think that the people want Maduro out. I did get the opportunity to talk to a couple. They do not represent, I do want to make that clear, they do not represent the Venezuelan voice. This was a particular person that was really young, had left Venezuela 2 months ago, and essentially he left because of the economy. He left looking for a job, he left because things weren't right.
This is a Venezuelan.
This is a Venezuelan person in Barcelona. He is about 19 years of age, very, very young. He left, and in speaking to him, he very much reinforced the sentiment that I had when we first spoke about Venezuela 2 months ago, which was, this is the people want him out. The marches that you see, because I've seen a lot of articles from people that are against the United States intervening.
You mean Maduro? By getting who out? Maduro?
By getting Maduro out, yes.
Let's be.
So some of the articles that I've read have said that first, the uprising that was led by Guaido with the military that led to Leopoldo's being taken out of house arrest was staged. The second thing was also that the amount of military that had actually went against the Venezuelan government.
Tell us who Leopoldo is for our audience, I'm sorry.
So Leopoldo was a political adversary of Maduro. So he was someone that was actually gaining traction, was someone that actually the people stood up for and were wanting to get elected, but Maduro incarcerated him for the same reasons of treason, essentially. But he was in house arrest, and he was essentially let go. Well, not let go, but the few military that stood against Maduro's military helped get him out of house arrest, essentially. You want to say something?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think we've had conversations around Venezuelan disagreements in terms of what's going on and how to get a reading of what's going on there, because we get a filter view, and obviously, I think maybe that's where we talk about U.S. media and the complicity or complete ignorance, or of what really is going on the ground in Venezuela. And even if it's ignorance, they still are a vehicle for U.S. Intentions down there, because we talked about this latest attempt of Guaido of overthrowing this military base, and all of the major newspapers, Washington Post, New York Times, BBC News, all these
Covered
Western, major media outlets were in line, saying that there was something, that basically Maduro was on his way down. And when in reality, in retrospect now, weeks later, we know that that was a completely staged thing. It was, at the very best, an attempt to garner support by Guaido. But in the U.S., it was being sold as, Venezuela needs a regime change, and we need to do something about it.
And here's where I stand. Where I stand is this person that I spoke to agrees with that sentiment, that this is a people-led movement, that they want Maduro out. However, while I do believe that the people want Maduro out, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily to the level that the United States is portraying it here, that it's as active, that it's as strong as it's being sold here. I do believe, looking at some of the later tactics the United States did, which is they had the embassy of the Venezuelan embassy, they cut their electricity. And they're not willing to reinstate electricity until like Guaido. It's another way of bullying the current representatives of Maduro's government in the United States. And again, it's putting pressure another way. They saw that the military uprising didn't work.
There was none. I mean, there was a few soldiers at the end of the day that some of them actually, some of the stuff I read and saw was that they were claiming that they were tricked into making it to that location that day, and they recorded this thing, let it out into the world, and pretended to make that this was an uprising. And it makes you wonder, like, what was the intention of this? They knew they didn't have the support, so the very it makes me wonder, were they trying to get in trouble, to maybe like finally have the U.S. intervene?
This is why we need to get involved.
By they, you mean who? For
Guaido and people behind him. Because they knew from the, I can't believe either he's an idiot, or he's really smart and he's trying to gain support. What is he trying to get out of not having support, in pulling a move like this? Because you have to be sure if you're pulling something like this of what you're gonna get.
What move?
Trying to overthrow the barracks or gain control of the government, because that's what they were claiming.
Right.
That they had this massive movement basically, or this military backup.
Right.
To take over government.
And they were asking people to come out to the streets to
a few weeks
show.
ago.
They were claiming themselves to be the legitimate government, trying to basically take power justifiably because that was the mandate of the people.
Right.
Yes.
But I mean, I agree with you, Gema, that there is popular opposition to Maduro. That's true. But there's no, the thing I would say is there's no connection between that popular uprising and the decisions that were made on April 30th.
Agreed.
No, but that's important then, because all that, if all of that is being run, not even by Guaido, but being run by the West and being run by and being pushed by the Western media to essentially create an avalanche of media, an avalanche of isolation to Maduro to try to then press for the coup from outside. Well, press for the replacement of Maduro. Then it is a coup.
No, and this is why I was making the transition to what happened with the embassy or the consulate, I'm not exactly sure which one of the two, powers being cut off, which is, it leads me to agree more with what you're saying, with the point that yes, the people want him out. However, at this point,
Which embassy where?
In Washington D.C. The Venezuelan in
Mm-hmm.
Washington D.C.
The U.S. has cut the power there. They cut the water there.
Even though they pay their bills.
Yes.
They pay their bills.
That's right.
So it's an attack. That's an aggression. I mean, and we can go into other topics, like sanctions and what these things mean.
What are you trying to say by the embassy?
So what I'm trying to say is that I do agree with, I still stand strongly with that the people want Maduro out. People are not happy in Venezuela. However, considering the current situation, which I do see, like Nicaragua, where people are they're tired, they're trying to survive. They can't survive, and on top of that, take over a government. Hold on, because I see you trying to jump in. The U.S. is now, the U.S. in fact has made a move to push and to assert itself in there. It's clear. The whole embassy thing, it was 100% clear. The fact, the big cover, that there's bigger stories, but the fact the United States is media is choosing to cover this in the way that they're covering, it's clear. They're trying to paint a picture. They're trying to make a reason as to why the United States needs to militarily get involved in Venezuela. So, to me, it didn't start as a coup, but by all means, the United States is like, we're gonna force this. We're gonna force this. We're gonna force this to happen. It didn't happen by the people. They weren't able to do it. We're gonna force it to happen. And when we force it to happen, we're gonna get what we want out of it.
I want to touch on 2 points. You keep saying that, the people. I don't think it's super clear. On the ground in Venezuela, the Chavistas or Maduristas, whatever, they still have a base. They are not completely baseless.
Yes.
And the other thing is that even people in Venezuela, just like in many Latin American countries, they're weary of any U.S. intervention.
Yes.
Even people that hate Maduro,
Right.
Because they know what the result is. We keep talking about this, that there is no examples in the world where the U.S. has intervened and brought a good thing. I was watching some shit, some things.
Yeah.
Show.
Like interviews of people on the ground, like in different towns, on the real news, if people want to check it out on their own, make their own decisions. Interviewing people and saying, like, the U.S. only brings death and destruction.
Yes.
They don't bring anything else. And my other point is how this suffering of Venezuela, which people are suffering, but the reasons are not being discussed in a clear way in the U.S. media especially. And the media is complicit in denying sort of like climate change, denying that the U.S. sanctions have created these conditions where people are eating crow on the ground. That maybe they're not the only reasons, but they're not contributing. This is not a humanitarian way of changing anything. It's just making things worse. It's squeezing the poorest, to desperation. And yet there's still no solid opposition to Maduro. That's why they're still in this position.
I want to comment and say that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo went to Europe and they were discussing with other European leaders about the Iran deal, Venezuela, and China. And there was one of the Russian politicians had come out and said that supporting a U.S. coup or change of regime in Venezuela would be the same as what has happened in Libya and what has happened in Iraq, where we have seen that the US American intervention trying to push their agenda for democracy, quote unquote, is what we have now. This is the democracy in Libya and Iraq that really isn't a democracy. And so I forget this Russian politician that we will link to, but I agree totally with him that Libya and Iraq stand as examples for how Venezuela could potentially could be the turnout of Venezuela.
Well, and the U.S. is trying to actually incite a civil war because there is some popular opposition to Maduro, and if they don't get the coup, then I think they're okay with just destabilizing the government. And so, at first I thought, I'm still questioning if the U.S. has overplayed its hand. They might have gotten some information from Guaido that, he was in a better position than they thought. Because frankly, with the U.S. behind them, if there was that large popular opposition, this should have been I think it should have been a slam dunk for Guaido. And it has collapsed pretty quickly. People are being arrested who are part of the opposition. The people from the military who initially sided with Guaido now are actually saying, my bad, and so I think it's dissolved fairly quickly. Partially, I suspect, because the U.S. and Guaido doesn't understand. If he invites the U.S. in, because he was pretty open about working with the United States, I think it pushes everyone back towards Maduro. And so I think I can't tell yet if the U.S. has misplayed, because this didn't work. But I think they must have known that, well, if it doesn't work, we have Plan B. And because the U.S. is, as we're going to be talking about, the U.S. is extending itself all over the place.
Right.
It's challenging Iran. It's starting a trade war with China. and it wasn't just sanctions. It isn't just sanctions against Venezuela. They have tried to sink the economy by working with Saudi Arabia to punch a bunch of oil into the economy, so that Russia's been more in trouble, and countries like Venezuela are more in trouble by virtue of it, to try to bring their economies down. So the U.S. is in so many different ways is doing economic and military warfare. And again, the irony is this whole Mueller investigation about Russia intervening in our elections, and the U.S. has just got its hands all across the globe. It's the level of hypocrisy couldn't be greater.
I mean, and in light of the recent events regarding Iran, at least for me, I see like a bigger picture of what's happening, even though the U.S. hasn't achieved any concrete, results in Venezuela. But I think that I don't know, it makes sense. I mean, I don't know if we transition into that question.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and before we do transition to Iran, let us not forget what is happening with the person that is leading the operation in Venezuela, which is being led by Elliott Abrams. And I think that his name should be mentioned because he is the person that worked under the Bush administration, senior Bush administration, that was leading the charge against the Sandinistas, because he supported the Contras against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. Had a lot of hid and denied the massacre that existed in El Salvador. These were war crimes that were committed in El Salvador. Supported the dictator in Guatemala. As well as has been part of the operation of the Contra-Iran scandal, which is what? The Contra-Iran scandal was the secret arms sale to Iran to be able to fund the Contras. And that was later on being charged. That was Elliott Abrams was being charged, and then what happened was he was pardoned by Bush. By senior for all the things I had just mentioned. And Elliott Abrams is supposed to be considered one of the respected people here, politicians inside the now Trump administration. And what I think is important to note is that he is a liar for having denied and hidden many of the crimes that were committed in Latin America. And this is the person that is appointed now to be leading the charge against Maduro in Venezuela. So I think it's very important that we take in consideration that Elliott Abrams is leading this, and for people like Joanna Hausmann, who is very popular on YouTube. Joanna Hausmann's father, anyone here, if you're listening on iTunes podcast, or if you're listening on Google Play, or if you're watching here on YouTube, please go and do a web search on Joanna Hausmann's father. He is part of the School of Government at Harvard University, and I encourage everyone to look up Ricardo Hausmann, who has reasons to be supporting Guaido and to be in opposition of Maduro, and was in opposition of Chavez. So Joanna Hausmann, again, if her point of view is being seen a lot by the New York Times, being highlighted her point, then we think we should also delve deep into her background. Mm-hmm. So Joanna Hausmann is not really doesn't have a very good point. A voice of the people, a very good point of view here, because she is tainted by her own bias against Maduro's government and supporting Guaido. Of course she is critical. She has things at stake here, of course. Her father is at stake here. So I don't trust Jonah Houseman. And I keep saying to everyone, before we move on to Iran, I'm Mexican, and we have to do what Mexico and what is it, Paraguay or Uruguay? I forget now. But that have actually suggested that they do mediation between Guaido and Maduro's oppositions, and that's what I think that should be done here. That we should be hands off Venezuela. I keep repeating, and now it's being coined by everyone in the media now, where it's hands off Maduro. No, hands off Venezuela and have mediation, either by the Pope, if everyone wants to use the Pope, ending. Either by the religion, the Pope, or have it by Mexico, my country, or have it by Paraguay, Uruguay. I forget who was being the neutral one. But Maduro's government has been overseeing, when the last elections, everyone keeps saying it's a fraud. It is the same people that overlooked the Brazilian elections. It is the same people that oversaw many of the Latin American elections in Latin America, that oversaw Maduro's election. And I will link to a great person called Badmouth something, who does YouTube videos and does these sort of investigations, who I was just looking at before I came here. And he has done extensive research on this, and I sent you a link, Andy, so that you can see that Joanna Hausmann's points and her opinion piece on the New York Times, they're all kind of, it's not telling the whole truth. And there's a lot of hidden things. Even what's his name, Oliver, the British guy on the Late Show, he himself giving like very short claim statistics. It isn't quite neutral. And so I'm here to say that we need to really do our research extensively before we just jump into conclusions, and we start saying that this isn't a coup, and we start saying that people like the Venezuelan people should be heard and we should get their opinion, when people like Venezuelan people like Joanna Hausmann have biases and have something at stake here. We have to realize, like I told my friend who's also Venezuelan, who also had an opinion on this as well, he said that largely a lot of the middle class left the Chavista time. And he is part of the middle class, Rafa shout out. And so I'm just saying that there's obviously a bias here. And if you want to say, we have to talk to Venezuelans to get an opinion about this, well, let's talk to Venezuelans. But there are plenty of Venezuelans that can tell you they are for Maduro or they are for Guaido. Where are you going to get the response? I think we need to really look at the movement that is happening in Venezuela and not outside of Venezuela, where the people who have fled because they're middle class. Not everyone has fled because they're middle class. I want to make sure that is clear. Like you said, I'm not sure about the person that you met in Spain, but I'm just saying the people that I have spoken to have their biases, and we should really consider those biases as well.
One thing
I don't know about this person that you mentioned.
No,
in Spain,
that's okay. That's okay.
I mean, I ask you, like,
Yeah.
is this person wealthy? Because obviously, if they have wealth, they leave and they have a different point of view on things. And I agree with you. I think it's important that you're, highlighting this Joanna, Houseman, because she does have a big voice and she can sway opinion one way or the other. So that's why it's important to keep people in check. I think it's difficult to know all the facts. I think one thing we can agree on is that, we don't want our government to make shit worse, because they always do.
That's what they're doing.
And so I don't know what's going on the ground completely 100%, but one thing we can agree is that the people should decide. I'm not defending Maduro. Hell no. Not even the government at all.
But it's up to the Venezuelan people to topple their nut.
And I would go this far. The minute the United States went in there and took Guaido's side, now I do defend Maduro. Now I do say, the U.S., now I do take sides. And I want the U.S. to be defeated in Venezuela. I want their cause, which is the cause of capitalism, which is the cause of immiserating those people, which is the cause of spreading war, not just to Venezuela, but to Colombia and Brazil and into Central America. That cause needs to be defeated. So actually now, as it relates to the U.S. intervention into Venezuela, and Maduro being the person who's going to oppose it along with some of the people and part of the military of Venezuela, I'm for Maduro defeating the United States military. Yes. That's the U.S. And that's what I think our position is. That's why I don't accept the idea of neutral mediation. Certainly not for the United States. The U.S. does not mediate anything neutrally. So we can't have that position.
So you earlier had said that you don't think that the Pope should intervene in mediation. But you're saying that countries like Mexico should not support mediation.
The forces in Europe right now, they're in the pocket of the United States, by and large.
No.
So everyone.
What about other Latin American countries?
Even a lot of South American countries have gone to the ultra right.
Okay.
So I would just say that, to me, it's not. I don't know what Mexico is going to do. I know that right now Mexico is chasing immigrants around, but
this is not.
That is the case.
Topic,
okay,
we're talking
but I'm
about
just saying,
Venezuela right now.
But I'm just saying that there's no one should intervene in Venezuela except for Venezuelans. And just the fact that there's exiles, we can't know what the right side is or wrong. I know the wrong side is the U.S. side. That's all I can tell you.
No.
Here's my thing with neutral mediation. We tried that in Nicaragua, and the Catholic Church was the one mediating it. And it was a complete failure because the government just did not play ball. The government did not do any of the things that they were supposed to do. And as a church, well, how can you hold up a government who has the military really up to say what to do, what they said that they were going to do? How do you hold them accountable? How do you force them to do it? At the end of the day, it's really up to them if they want to or if they don't want to. You're going to show up and you're going to try and tell them, okay, well, let's hear sides. Let's stick to the agenda. What? And it doesn't work. I'm telling you right now, in Nicaragua, it didn't work. The dialogue that's tried to happen didn't work. Now my government is no longer Catholic. Now they're evangelic. Because the Catholic Church are...
Worse.
Yeah, the Catholic Church did treason.
Evangelic.
So... I think that it is a beautiful sentiment to think, but it just, at least for my country, in Nicaragua, it did not work. Now, as far as to what you're saying, let the Venezuelans figure things out. The only way you can let the Venezuelans figure things out is if you remove all outside forces that are making it so that Venezuelans have to choose. Because I'm telling you right now, while I would prefer to live in a country where I don't depend on U.S. imperialism, I can go to school, I can have free healthcare, I can have free everything, pay higher tax, that's fine. The reality is that I can't get that if you don't let my government provide that good to me by letting it sell its good, by letting it import stuff, by letting it take out loans, because every country needs to be able to do that. The United States does it. No one puts sanctions on the United States. Yet they're the ones that violate most of the human rights.
Yeah.
But nobody does it. So if we're going to let Venezuela do its thing, you're going to first have to figure out how to lift those sanctions so that the people really make an educated decision.
And that's what Kenny was saying. That the starting point is the responsibility of those of us in this country to stop our government from meddling in Venezuela and Iran and China, all these places.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
So that's my thing.
Well, here what's left, I think Andy and I have already said that we don't support sanctions and that sanctions do not work.
Well, they do work. They're an act of war.
Yeah.
But they don't work to force or make someone to change, because look at North Korea.
I think they do work.
They do work from this is where I agree with you, because you're coming at it from a different perspective. You're saying they work for the purposes of the country that's trying to apply the sanctions
Correct.
to get what they want.
Right.
So that's where you're saying that they work. I say that they work when they're used correctly, in the sense of, in Nicaragua, they did not sanction the country. The country can still take loans. The country can sell. The country can operate as a country. Nothing's limiting the country to continue business as usual. The sanctions were placed against the people. Individuals. That's where sanctions work. Because when you have a family that has, or a person that has so much power, so much wealth that they can buy their way out of anything, what do you do to get them out? You cut that wealth. That to me is where sanctions work.
Yeah,
to a person, not to a country.
Yeah.
For a humanitarian purpose.
For a humanity, exactly.
That's what
You're saying United States imposed sanctions, that's what's happening in Nicaragua for humanitarian purposes. That's a contradiction. They're not doing anything for humanitarian purposes. They have every intention of doing government change and of running. So it doesn't exist. That thing you're talking about doesn't exist.
What I mean it for, though, is that the people are eating crow because the government's still in the power. Not because
they haven't worked, the sanctions.
Because
the way you intend.
They don't work the way that we intend, because it hasn't gotten to the point like Venezuela. It really hasn't.
Well, I think if you want to talk about, again, this is where the issue of Iran comes up. They're a case study in sanctions, and sanctions are imposed as so-called a peaceful alternative to making direct war.
Right.
But that's a false thing. That is, sanctions are an act of war. They're an economic act of war, and that's when a foreign government comes in and applies sanctions, that is an act of war. U.S. would see that with any government doing that. Any government that applied sanctions on the United States, they would see it as an act of war. In fact, that's what they're accusing China of in relationship to the tariffs and things like that. They're saying you are trying to steal our copyright laws, that steal our technology. And the United States wants to get access to Chinese technology at the same time. So the United States doesn't accept any sort of restrictions on itself and sees any of that sort of stuff as things they must respond to and punish countries for doing. So I don't see how we can accept the United States doing that with anyone.
Naming a person.
No, because they're acting on it. They're always acting on the U.S. self-interest of some, and that interest is a criminal interest.
Yeah.
And it's a criminal interest of extracting resources from Central America and South America. That's the history. It's Monroe Doctrine.
I think that thinking that the U.S. will do anything for humanitarian reasons is a huge mistake.
Yes.
It's not. I mean, there's so many issues in the world. Like Sudan, for example, there was a genocide going on there. They never intervened. There is no interest there, no significant interest. So they let hundreds of thousands of people die.
And now that they are intervening actually in Sudan, they're intervening again for their own naked self-interest, creating more conflict, like we talked about around the African Spring. So the U.S. is now taking sides to prop up a government so that there's not an Islamic government that takes over.
So there is no evidence that we can apply sanctions for humanitarian reasons, and I don't think there is good intentions ever in terms of for the benefit of the people that are most vulnerable.
And I think that's the story that's why this is a bigger story. The U.S., we are now, the U.S. is now even talking about 120,000 troops being used. I don't think they're going to do it.
They're not going to do it.
But
this is them crying.
You're right. I will say that even Trump, I think I read today, was actually backtracking and basically going. But it's clear that there are people within the State Department, in the what is it, the NSC, the National Security Council, who do have an interest in making war with Iran, and who do think that the United States needs to get tougher on them. And
this is Bolton.
Like Bolton, yeah.
This is Bolton.
Bolton and even Pompeo. All right, they have a different way of doing it, and supposedly Pompeo and Bolton disagree on some stuff, but both of them have wanted to be more belligerent with Iran.
Yeah.
And that again means direct conflict with Russia. So it's the United States is a rogue state, and that's the same country that's acting in Venezuela, that's acting in Nicaragua, is doing the same stuff in Iran, and is doing this, and every one of them is for the same reason, which is to advance U.S. interests and to make it so that they can control the economies and control the world.
Yeah.
Well, shifting from Venezuela to Iran, as you had already, we're already making, I think that there is something to say about Iran and what now the USA has labeled their National Guard as a terrorist group now, because this is, I think, the first time that you're naming an actual military supported by the government that is actually a government created a terrorist group. Because terrorist groups normally are given to small factions that are outside of government,
right?
That are like
non-state.
Yes, like the Taliban or Al Qaeda, but this is now a direct attack towards Iran and a provocation to Iran, and that is what I think. What does Trump say he wants to? I was reading something on the BBC to act like a normal country. What is acting like a normal country? I think what the Trump administration wants is to have Iran support Hezbollah or the Houthis down in Yemen. And so this is again supporting those two for what? For their own interests, because Saudi-led and the Lebanon Hezbollah interest. So, and again, Iran is also something that is seen as an enemy for Israel. So it's all coming back to the USA's provocation for war, and I think it's largely being led by outside forces outside of Trump. I don't think it's Trump really constantly. I think Trump, like against North Korea in the beginning, and slightly changed his tone to North Korea. But then if you see with Iran, it keeps getting heightened, I think, by the forces that are behind there trying to control this Trump. So I'm not saying Trump from the beginning did say and criticized the Iran deal, which many did as well. Even the Obama administration did criticized Iran for years, and then they came to this Iran deal. But I do think that Iran is trying to do its best to comply with the deal with the European nations that are still trying to hold on to this deal. But the USA is still trying to even put sanctions on businesses that are doing business with Iran. So it's just provocation after provocation, and I can only see that this is going to go badly for Iran and Venezuela eventually.
Just I think for me, I think it's important to put into perspective what Iran, and in terms of just interest, like I was doing some research before we came here, and like Venezuela has the biggest proven oil reserves in the world. Saudi Arabia is second, Canada is third, and then you have Iran, oil reserves in the world. And the U.S. last year became the biggest oil producer in the world. That's by virtue of destabilizing Venezuela and other countries. But that means more control, more power. And so that's why, I was just putting, because Venezuela and Iran are two countries that are in the news a lot, and they're being crippled by sanctions, and going back to Venezuela, some of the things that, again, our media does not cover is, like the blackouts that happen in Venezuela, and that their inability to restart, the power grid was due to the sanctions. So that exacerbated, people suffering, which our media cares so much about. But they always overlook the impact of sanctions for the average person, and their abilities to, just live and subsist. But yeah, just wanted to throw that out there. And but yeah, but question is that what do you make of this? These facts that the U.S. is making moves to have more control in a very aggressive way, of markets, because Iran also is a big provider of oil to China, to I believe like other U.S. enemies per se. Venezuela similar. And so, I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I mean, the only comment that I have is really, it goes back to, that's exactly what Venezuela back in Chavez's day was trying to do, was trying to create this competing way where other countries could take out loans, could be financially independent, and not have to rely on the United States. And of course, Iran was part of it. So it was, Iran, Venezuela, Russia, Nicaragua, Cuba. And it really, and the big thing, at least for the Latin part of it, was coming from Venezuela.
They created an economic
And
bloc.
what do these countries have in common? Anything that they're doing that the USA does not want them to do, right?
Right, which is why to me it stands out. The United States is now saying, and look, for the most part, it was very successful. I do have to say that they were successful.
The United States.
No.
Chavez and the economic Mercosur. Like creating these economic ties to circumvent the IMF, the US, the World Bank. They would give loans to, basically leftist countries in Latin America.
Okay.
And that was the whole pink tide in Latin America. When Evo Morales in Bolivia, Lula da Silva, Kirchner in Argentina. That was like, there was a lot of leftist governments, and of course they had their issues, but there was growth in a lot of these countries. Brazil was growing crazy. Nicaragua was growing like crazy, and like just because this is something we know about, like we lived in Nicaragua, and we know that Nicaragua was growing by virtue of a lot of these trades, and there is corruption. I mean, I'm not gonna defend everywhere. There's corruption in our government here. We call it a fucking,
It's white collar crime. It's easily forgiven.
But there was growth, and we didn't have a problem necessarily with the government because of the way it was handling the economy. Our problem was when they started repressing people in a violent way, and just making, becoming like the U.S., creating an alternative reality of things. And so going back to Chavez, Chavez, and during that time, a lot of countries were growing in Latin America, and not by intervention of, again, IMF or these traditional neoliberal institutions. They were growing because they found a way to circumvent it. But obviously the oil prices crashed, and
which is where everything to me now ties in. To me, this is again going back to the United States saying, oh, you try to play something else, you try to form your own little league, it's not going to work. You got to play with us. And now it's taking steps to essentially screw everybody over, including Iran. And to me, this is where it kind of goes over, because I can understand the United States wanting, and I'm not saying that they should, I'm not saying it's okay, to enforce Monroe Doctrine and making sure, that Nicaragua, Venezuela, that we stay in line. But then when you go all the way to Iran, and they're trying to say that, oh, it's because Iran is putting these missiles that can go and attack our troops, can actually attack. It's like, no. No, you're going back to the war on terror.
Mm-hmm.
You're going back to look at this, and you're using this just as a way of promoting and getting into those sanctions. And from what I understand, Iran is going to try and see it through and hope that in 2020 there will be another president that won't be Trump that will play ball with them.
I mean, what I do heard that Iran is basically saying is, unless some of these sanctions are lifted, we're going to start enriching uranium and do it enough to produce our first nuclear weapon, and then we're going to make it impossible for you to attack us, which I think is the right of Iran to do, to defend itself.
Right.
The pretext, the immediate pretext for why Iran is in the target crosshairs was supposedly there were claims that a Saudi Arabian tanker was attacked by forces connected to Iran. And similarly, there were the what's that, Houthis?
The Houthis?
Houthis, that they did a drone attack on a Saudi Arabian refinery, and so both those attacks made a claim that Iran was a terrorist state. So those were the immediate pretexts for the U.S. to go after Iran, and it wasn't just a threat of 120,000. That's right. It isn't just the threat of 120,000 troops. They are deploying forces there. They've got marine forces now, amphibious forces stationed near there that weren't stationed there before. Now that can still be stuff to threaten, and I understand that. But again, if the U.S. would not accept any of these sorts of things right on the border of San Francisco or New York or Washington D.C., I mean, all those would be considered very aggressive acts of war if any country did such a thing, and they're made to threaten the country. These things are done to threaten the country. The thing that comes to mind for me is why is the U.S. doing this right now? And because at one level, it seems almost a bit of overreach. They tried to go into Venezuela, and now they're going to have to back off a little bit, and they're going to have to back off of Iran a little bit here, because they're not going to be able to get everything they want.
Russia is there.
Yes, and
they have been making sure that it's the
exactly.
Not
but we have to be clear. They're trying to really reestablish Monroe Doctrine to say Europe, Russia, China out of South America. They're challenging China directly with a trade war, and they're challenging Russia directly when they go after Iran. I mean, they're declaring war on everyone right now, and that I partially wonder if this is overreach. But at the same time, we've seen the U.S. do things like this before and be like, oh, they've got a plan in mind, and I partly wonder, and I do think oil and control of oil figure into it. I think it's been the last global economic crisis was 2008, and everyone knows there's a one around the bend, and I do believe the U.S. may very well be just again positioning itself to be able to be in the best position to come out ahead relative to Russia, relative to China, and so I think about those sorts of things. I don't know, but that's what comes to mind.
On the surface, it seems that they are well positioned because they have disrupted Venezuela and Iran, which are big providers of these basic, industrial good, right, for China and Russia, and so at the moment I think they are, and they don't have to intervene, but they have to disrupt. Yeah. And they have effectively disrupted the ability of these two very important countries. In terms of resources, they have disrupted their ability to produce. And again, that's one of the reasons the U.S. is a top producer now. And it's not just that the U.S. increases production, but these other countries have decreased theirs by virtue of sanctions again. And so I do think they're very well positioned, and I doubt that they're going to intervene militarily. Because, I don't know. But I also question the interest in this country because the military industrial complex, there is money to be made if there is war by all these contractors and so I'm sure there's also people licking their fingers if there is war, right? Because there is huge money to be made.
But my understanding is that's exactly why Bolton is pushing for it. That's my understanding. My understanding is that Bolton, look, Trump has pulled troops of anything from countries, and we don't really see our military being that offensive as to I think when it was Obama and the Bush era. I actually feel like it's kind of gone down a little bit. Maybe it's just not in the mainstream.
Drowning people.
Yes. Okay. Yes, you are drowning people.
And that has grown. And they claimed they were going to move troops out of Syria, but I don't know if that's happened. And I'm not sure how much it happened because I agree with you. Trump made words of of a less of a U.S. footprint. But I don't think we've seen that, and that's partly why. I mean, some of the things we said about the Mueller investigation was I feel like Trump is now in the pocket of the State Department, of the forces, the deep state that now really run this thing, and I feel like they're basically able to decide what the United States is going to do, and I don't think Trump's in a position to act on those isolationist things that he ran on, that people actually hoped that he would do. I don't think he's in, you had mentioned it, I don't think he's complete control of the show right now.
No, and I would agree with that. You can see just by the changing and the coming of the cabinet, it's just nothing is going his way. And then you have him saying one thing and then his representatives doing and acting on another thing. And then he's almost doing like, well, like almost like, no, we kind of agree. We just had to tweak this. So yeah, no, I would agree with that.
Sure, but they still, I don't know, I feel like they have been very effective, way more than Obama in the first term. In advancing this, look at abortion. That's the topic of the day. And no. But it's just an example to me. Like that's the way they operate. They create instability everywhere, and the people don't know what's gonna happen. And and then you're focusing on this one thing, and guess what? They changed the tax code. They're going for immigration right now, supposedly for the overhauling the immigration system, and so I think that's the way they operate, or and I don't know, but I know there is conflict. There is, I do see that he's not fully in control. The deep state is still not operating, and there is conflicts in terms of that. But I do think we moved away from Russia, right? Like it's all about China now, and Iran and Venezuela.
But going after Iran is going after Russia.
Okay.
So that's why it's like, it seems like we're fighting wars on all fronts. And I agree with you that it's probably an overstatement to say Trump's. It does seem like he's a useful person to have running the country, and this method that he has of like what he did with North Korea, which is I'm going to threaten them. I'm going to talk about we're going to nuke them, and then a month later we're going to make a deal.
Yeah.
Like I think that's even in his Art of the Deal book, which is you push, and then you try to reach the best deal under the fire of the pressure you put this. Well, now you have this guy essentially running our country and using that method. It's a dangerous game to play.
Of course.
Wow, Andy, this is the first time I've seen you criticize your friend, Trump.
Well, you have a friend in the Vatican, and I have a friend in D.C.
The Pope.
At least my friend is not
I'll bring my MAGA hat next time.
He's got a lifetime position.
This is true. Your friend might be out 1 year tops, 5 years.
No,
from
Trump
now,
is going
but...
to. First of all, he's not my friend.
We're acquaintances.
At best.
But he's going to win the election. Biden's not going to win. We're going to get Trump 2020. Trust me. Yeah.
You heard it here
We did
first,
an episode for our audience on predictions for 2020, 2019 and 2020, 2019. Well, anyhow, please check it out.
Yeah. So, I don't know if anybody had anything else to say about any of this stuff.
I think we've exhausted and beleaguered.
Talk too much about.
Beleaguered the point.
Yeah.
I will say
Belabored.
That's it.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is a big word. My vocabulary.
You see, I may not know how to pronounce it, but I always know how to say this.
Yeah.
Bring up words. He helps me with the pronunciation. Is that it for anyone else?
Well, I want to see if Gema or Kenny, you have any last thoughts about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
We've already, like Gema was saying, because we had an edit, and Gema was saying this whole thing is going to have to be edited because it's a big mess, which is true. But that's what we do here at What's Left. We put on a big mess. You listen to the whole thing.
And you sort it out.
And you sort it out. You decide what you want to listen to and not. So now let's add to the mess if you want.
If you want to make it more, I want to make it messy.
All right.
Go ahead.
No. Just before the break, just came to mind. We talked about terrorism and how they use this, to basically paint Iran or even Venezuela. I think they put them on the terrorist watch list, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Then the hypocrisy, comes to light when talk about Saudi Arabia. Here is the country that sponsors the most radical, Wahhabism, right? The side of Islam, and a lot of the people that bombarded, 9/11, they came from that country, you know, and they create a lot of instability, but yet, you know, they're not on that list, and you know, and their biggest allies, they, you know, buy weapons left and right, they distribute weapons left and right, and they're not on the watch list. So, you know, just gotta be careful with, you know, buying into this whole notion of terrorism and, you know, who's our enemy and or our foe, you know.
And it's worth remembering that the target after this, that Jamal Khashoggi was murdered by Saudi Arabia.
He was a U.S. resident. Or
Yeah,
He was a
and,
resident.
You know, and Bin Salman, the Saudi Arabian prince, was like in the hot seat.
Yeah.
And the war on Yemen was actually, for a brief period of time, was actually being considered like the war crime that it was.
Yeah.
Well, now actually, this is all off the table now. Now Iran's the target. Now Iran's the bad guy.
And
Saudi Arabia is actually a victim. Saudi Arabia is like, oh, we're a victim of Iranian terror.
Yeah.
And so this is actually, again, very convenient for getting out of the hot seat a very important, crucial ally of the U.S., not just in the region, but for controlling the globe.
Yeah.
Because if Saudi Arabia's oil production is used by the United States to wreak havoc on the economies all around the globe.
And let's not forget that, you know, by virtue of the involvement of the U.S., Saudi Arabia, you know, Yemen has one of the biggest humanitarian crises, you know, in the world right now, and you know, we don't
hear about it.
Yeah,
right. And it was being heard about, but now this thing has now moved the discussion away from Saudi Arabia and onto Iran.
Yeah.
So yeah. What do you have any final thoughts? We want to make this episode even more of a mess?
I don't want to make this episode more of a mess. I agree with Eduardo. I think we did beat a dead horse at the end of the day. The United States needs to get all of its little sticky tentacles out of everybody's cookie jars. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting next couple of years, I think. There's a lot of pieces up in the air, a lot of, you know, moves that I think the United States is making that I'm not quite sure how they're going to play out, but it'll be interesting to see where it leads us to.
Just, you know, it's just an open question, you know, so what do we do about it, you know, as people? But we don't have to answer it in this episode, but,
well,
you know, we can.
I can tell you Libson's answer. Go Libson, anarchy.
Not anarchy, socialism. I mean, the thing is that you brought up the idea that when the Mercosur and trying to do your own version of capitalism in opposition to the United States was briefly it started to work.
It was a success story for.
Well, but the success story turns into a failure when it leads to Bolsonaro in Brazil, when it leads to the rise of the right, and so there is no answer other than the socialist revolution. Socialist revolution in the United States, working class revolution here, working class revolution in Brazil, in Venezuela. All these governments are actually going to have to be taken down. And we talked about this in Africa, you know. So that is the answer. We are far away from that. And we're far away from that in the United States because most people like John Oliver, and John Oliver is like, he's a mouthpiece for liberal war making in Venezuela. And justifying U.S. war making in that region. So,
to answer to your question, Kenny, I think we need to make sure that our government does not go and make more provocation, and does not go and try to have more wars with Iran, Venezuela, with now with Sudan. I think we need to keep our government in check, and that is what we need to do to keep our government. I think, again, Venezuela needs to handle themselves, and we, here in this country, the people who live here, should try to rein in this government to focus here. And I think that is what we have to do. And I give my shout out to, well, they don't know me, but I hear them a lot, and I do watch them and follow them. Code Pink, which are occupying the embassy, the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C., and they are really trying to make sure that there is a smooth transition, and that the Guaido's people do not take the embassy because they don't feel that they feel that is violating the peace between Maduro and Guaido. It's just escalating tensions because currently Maduro is the president. We have to acknowledge it, whatever we think of him. he is the president of Venezuela, and that embassy belongs to Venezuela, and they gave permission. Maduro's government gave permission to Cold Pink to occupy the embassy. So it's not like they're just some white people occupying the embassy. No, Maduro actually gave the key. Maduro's government gave the keys to the Cold Pink and to be there. And the State Department, the Washington D.C. I don't know what they're doing with trying to prevent, but they're trying to prevent food, and they're trying to prevent. They're trying to restrict food, and they're trying to cut off electricity and the water. I don't know about the water. And Jesse Jackson, about yesterday or this week, Reverend Jesse Jackson went to go give the food to the people occupying the embassy. So I think that is what we need to do here in this country, is we need to do acts like that to try to slow down the expansion of U.S. imperialism.
And I think they were arrested, actually. I think the U.S. government went in and arrested the people like Cold Pink.
No, they did not go into the embassy.
They can.
I don't know, because I
I
we'll
saw
check
it
on this.
today.
But I thought I saw something put out by the Answer Coalition that said that they had been.
They went into the embassy.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
So we'll double check.
We will check that.
Yeah,
and if
then
it's true,
put it
then-
down
but-
on the links.
And that's huge because it's a sovereign territory.
Yeah.
If you go into an embassy, it's a
That would
huge.
be
Yeah.
violating the Geneva Convention.
But that's what they've been doing. They
Yeah.
did that with the. I mean, they didn't violate it, but they went in to get Julian Assange. You know, the
Yeah.
British, and so
But that Ecuador gave permission.
permission.
Yeah.
yeah.
To go in.
So
Yeah. All right. Well, that's
I'll check on that, because
Yeah.
if it's not true, then I'll remove all that part.
all right. Yeah. All right.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Sorry you missed the Golden State Warriors end of the Golden State.
Sorry, they won.
We don't promote sports here.
Yeah, yeah.
Well then, I'm with the wrong crowd.
Can you please cut that part?
Cut the part where we punch it like
We have other things to concentrate on.
Oh my gosh! All right.
Okay.
No jiu-jitsu for you either, Lipson.
No.
Kidding.
So next week we'll see what we do. It might be our year anniversary.
You guys need a
Yes.
year anniversary.
So, for new audiences, because I know we have new subscribers, because our subscriber, even though it's now 50, I think, 51, I think, or something like that, we have now just reached 50 subscribers for because of Andy's Confessions of an ex-ISO member. Last week's episode became the most popular on YouTube of our channel, and it reached almost 300 views, and that is the most of any of the YouTube videos. And I don't encourage people to watch our YouTube videos. We're just two boring people sitting down. I encourage people to listen. We're boring. I think I'm a boring person to look at. But if you listen to the iTunes podcast, or if you just even put YouTube in the background, just listen to it as you're in the kitchen or doing your things or doing errands, then you can listen to the entire thing.
That's a great promotion to say not to listen.
We're not really interesting people to look at.
Do
We're
not-
interesting topics to
do
discuss,
not
but
listen to
not
this,
to be
do not
looked at
watch
the
this.
We'll
entire
cut this
time.
all. You guys will cut this part out. You guys will
I
edit this
agree.
part.
But thank you for our new subscribers, and thank you for checking us out. So we are here, and we can find us on iTunes podcast. You can find us on Google Play. You can find us on Stitcher. You can find us on BitChute, and you can find us on YouTube. Please subscribe, rate, review, and best of all, share with everyone, friends and family. And we will check it out next week.
Next week. All right. See you later.
Ciao.
Right.
Bye.